Today we're going to talk about reality therapy. The founder of this model is Bill Glasser, and with what I call the cycle number one, thing is kind of the person who's worked most closely with Glasser to develop this. If you return to our sort of taxonomy of different theories, where we have the psychodynamic theories, the humanistic theories, and the cognitive behavioral theories, this model probably most closely fits into the cognitive behavioral model. And when Wibbleding has sort of classified this, that's what he will say. The emphasis in reality therapy tends to be on doing behaviors as well as sort of doing and thinking. So it would fall probably most closely in the idea of cognitive behavioral therapy. If you look historically, reality therapy began when many of the other models that we've talked about began, in terms of you follow psychoanalysis up, and somewhere in the late 40s and 50s, people began getting frustrated with psychoanalysis. Bill Glasser was among those he's medically trained, so he's a physician, was trained as a psychiatrist, and decided that, after several years of practicing, psychoanalysis just wasn't quite where it was at for him. He found himself frustrated and struggling with working with clients, many of whom were pretty seriously mentally ill. He worked in a psychiatric hospital with people with long-term psychotic kinds of problems. And he found that whether it was someone psychotic or non-psychotic, spending a long time mulling over childhood issues and concerns, figuring out what it is which leads to or is the root of one's problems, and gaining awareness might be very interesting, but he didn't notice that this growth in insight and awareness necessarily led to any dramatic behavioral change. And Glasser thought that that's really where the heart of psychotherapy should be. It was not helping people gain awareness of their problems, but in actually helping people to do something about and change their problems. So as his story goes, he was working at a psychiatric hospital and started kind of doing the stuff of his own on the side, without necessarily a lot of talking about this in case conferences or staffings or so forth and so on, and just kind of trying and seeing how this new model he was developing worked. And finally one day he goes into his main confidant and supervisor, a guy named Dick Harrington, and sort of worried says, well, I've been having trouble with this psychoanalysis stuff, and I've started doing something new. And he's telling Harrington this story, and sort of worried that Harrington is going to say, you're not doing what you're supposed to, and psychoanalysis is the one and only way to truth, and so forth. And he says that Harrington stood up from his chair, leaned across the desk, and said, "Welcome to the club, Bill." And Glasser said from that day on, that was sort of the birth of reality therapy. If you look at sort of reality therapy in a nutshell, it is a very action, or Glasser's word might be more doing oriented, present day approach, where Glasser really focuses on talk about the present, and delving into the past he doesn't see as particularly valuable or useful at all, except for occasionally going into the past to see when has something worked, where have you been successful, and then helping to look at that and use that to plan future successes. So it's action-oriented, it's present day, and it really helps people take a lot of personal responsibility for who they are, for their own actions, and mostly his latest word for his current theory is choice. And his most recent sort of theoretical publication is a book published in 1998 called Choice Theory. And the undergirding idea of reality therapy and choice theory is that we are responsible for our lives and for what we do with our lives. So if we were talking about Freud, and we talked about that Freud's model is very deterministic, that there's this cauldron of innate energy, and there's these unconscious forces, and early childhood development, it holds very powerful influence on us. This model is very much to the side of free will, where Glasser says your life is up to you. And you can blame other people and place responsibility on others and try to control others as much as you want, but it doesn't work. You cannot control another person, nor can another person control you. So figure out what you want to do with your own life and let others live their own life. But don't try controlling others and don't give others responsibility for controlling you. Your life is dependent upon the choices that you make. And he doesn't say that what others do makes no difference. He makes a big distinction between control, which is I can force another person to do something, and what he says we can do, which is we can influence others. So if I am married, I cannot make my husband do anything. But my behavior, my actions, my words could influence him to make certain choices. He cannot make me do anything. But what he does can influence me that one choice might be a better option than another choice based on my relationship with him. And Glasser says that the whole sort of influence we have over others lies within our relationship. So that the fundamental, at the core of what we want to help clients do is to develop good, meaningful, rich relationships with people around them, because in that way they can have influence as well as a sense of connection, and it meets one of their basic needs, and we'll get into basic needs in a minute. But this is sort of the power that you have is through the connection that you have with others. So if you have a client come in who's a parent of a teenager who says, I don't know what to do, my kid won't do his homework, or my daughter is hanging around with this really scary, creepy boyfriend, and I know that they're going to have sex if they haven't done it, and how can I make her not have sex? Well, you know, if she's 15, unless you tie her up and lock her in her room, put her in a jail cell, you can't make your kid not have sex, you can't make your kid do their homework, you can't make them choose not to, go out and get drunk or get stoned, but you can influence them. And the way you influence them is through a strong relationship with them. And what Glasser points out is that very often the things we do to try to control important people in our life actually destroy that relationship instead of working on making it better. So he asks people commonly the question, if you do that, will that bring you closer together or farther apart? If you lock your daughter in her bedroom like a jail cell, will that bring you closer together or farther apart? If you are angry with your partner for not helping to wash the dishes after dinner, and you run off in a huff every night and a snit and you throw things around the house, will that bring you closer together or farther apart? And if it's farther apart, is that really helping you to gain influence in such a way that it's going to help to meet your needs? And so Glasser believes that a lot of the misery that we experience is because other people are trying to control us through bribing, through punishing, through offering rewards that the behaviorists will talk about with sticks and carrots, incentives, positive reinforcers, and punishers. Glasser does all this control stuff. It just leads to human misery, and we really need to put responsibility for people's behavior and people's feelings and people's thoughts and so forth back onto them, and that will result in a much happier, more productive world. Anyway, so that's sort of the overview of this model. Looking at a couple of the pieces, one of the fundamental ideas that Glasser talks about is this idea of needs. And he sees human behavior as being regulated by our brain. And he talks about how our brain is a control mechanism. It controls our body. And it controls the choices that we make, in that he thinks we have genetically encoded in us, all humans, have these 5 basic needs. We all have a need to survive. These are our physiological needs. We need food, we need water, we need shelter, and for the survival of the species, we need sex. Outside of the biological survival needs, we all have 4 psychological needs. The need for love and belonging, freedom, power, and fun. Love and belonging needs are our need to connect with others. And Glasser makes no bones about saying that if you are human, in order to be a psychologically healthy person, you need to have at least one strong connection with at least one other person on planet Earth. Whether that's your mother, whether that's your partner, whether that's a child, whether that's a friend. But you need at least one good human connection. And he says it's through meeting your love and belonging need that we help meet our other needs. Love and belonging can be, you know, a sexual love, it can be an intimate love, it can be a companionship, it can be all of the above, but we all need this. Now some people are much more extroverted, much more gregarious, like to be at loud parties with lots of people. Other people like to spend, you know, quiet evenings home, reading a book with another person on a couch or watching television or taking a walk together. But we all need some connection to another person. Freedom is our need to have some options over what to do with our time and space in our life. Power, Glasser talks about, is not being sort of an unhealthy power where, you know, I can put you in your place and, you know, stick you under my thumb and make you do what I want you to do. But power is something that each of us needs to have some control over some things in our life so that we can do something and make a difference. We can build something and say, I did that. We can create something and say, look, this is mine. We can say, tonight I'd really like to go to Pizza Hut for dinner. And our family will say, okay. Or our friends will say, yeah, we can do that. Last time, you know, we went out to Wendy's and tonight Pizza Hut is fine. So some degree of power. And fun. Fun is something which leads to pleasure. Whether it's bungee cord jumping, you know, or wild crazy parties, or whether it's sitting home reading a novel. Each of us need to do something which leads to fun, pleasure, relaxation. And Glasser says that through the meeting of each of these needs, this is how human behavior is determined. So he says that what we do is, since all of us need these, and he says people differ in terms of the levels of these needs that we have. So some people may have very strong love and belonging needs, very low power needs, very low need for fun. Other people may need lots of fun. Their life may need to be, you know, pretty filled with all sorts of, you know, activities and stuff, but, you know, their need for love and belonging, as long as they got, you know, one or two fairly decent friends, such is life. And all of us vary here, but each of us have each of these needs and needs to have them filled. When Glasser says problems arise, as you can imagine, is if somebody with, let's say, a very high love and belonging need marries somebody with a very high freedom need. The person with a love and belonging need may continuously feel as if I'm abandoned, I'm neglected, I'm not loved. And the person with a high freedom need may feel like, oh my goodness, they're trying to strangle me, they're always going to be in my face, I need to get away, I need some air. So he talks about, particularly if you're trying to choose a life partner, it's very helpful to look at people's needs profiles and try to match your needs with someone who's compatible rather than incompatible. And compatible doesn't necessarily mean equivalent, it just means that it makes sense that the two of you would work out together. Well, what he says our brain does is that our brain is busy organizing our behavior in such a fact as to meet whichever need is screaming to us at the time, meet me, meet me, meet me. So that if you are a graduate student and you're kind of making ends meet, so your survival needs are you're fed, your rent is paid, and so forth. You're married or have, you know, a close relationship with a roommate or a friend or have a good partner. Your power needs kind of sort of, but you know, every day you're coming home and you're studying, you're working a full-time job to put food on the table and pay your rent, and you know, every spare minute in your life is absolutely gobbled up with either work or practicum or studying. You may be screaming, I need some freedom, I need some free time, and I need to have some fun. So in graduate school, these may be huge needs that you're having, and Glasser says your brain then is going to look for ways to get those needs met. Well, how do we do this? Your brain will lead you to behave. And Glasser doesn't talk just about behavior. He has what he calls total behavior. And total behavior is a combination of a variety of different things. It is your action, or what you do. Also, he considers thinking a part of behavior. He considers your feelings a part of behavior. And he considers your physiology part of behavior. What this means is that anything you do has these four components. So imagine that you are sitting at home watching the CD-ROM right now. Your action in doing is sitting and watching a CD-ROM. Your thinking is whatever that might be. Wow, this is the most fascinating, greatest new information I've ever heard. Or, boy, this is boring. Or what am I going to have for dinner? Or whatever your thinking is. Your feelings, if you're having those first thoughts, might be just excited and sitting on the edge of your seat. And your physiology might be a slightly, elevated pulse and elevated blood pressure if this is fascinating. If your thinking is, oh, this is so dull, your feelings may be, kind of low, boredom, if that's a feeling, and your physiology is, you keep nodding off just about going to sleep. But those are all components of your total behavior. Everything you're doing is not just watching a tape, but it takes each of these components in place. Now, what Glasser talks about with these is that all parts of total behavior are not created equal. It says, and imagine, this is why I'm not an art teacher, but rather a social work teacher. Imagine that this is a bird's eye view of an automobile. So this is the car, and these are the wheels. Glasser puts doing and thinking in the front of the car, and he puts feeling and physiology in the back of the car, such that, and doing is in the driver's seat, such that he says we have more conscious control over our doing and thinking components of our behavior than we do over our feeling and physiological. Not that these are less important, but that in a car, the car kind of goes where the front of the car goes. That's where the wheels turn, and the driver's seat is kind of the person in charge, and Glasser puts doing in the driver's seat. He says that feeling and biology follow what you are doing and what you are thinking. He also sees that if you're a therapist and you're working with somebody, that it's a lot easier to ask somebody if they come in, I'm so sad, I'm so depressed, I'm so miserable, instead of saying, well, why don't you just be happy? That people are much more likely to be happy if they're doing happy things and thinking happy thoughts. So that we have more conscious control over these. And a nice sort of experiment that he will do is he'll say, okay, all of you, and those of you watching this tape can sort of walk through this in your brain. I would like you right now, and we'll go through all four tires of the car. I would like all of you right now to raise your blood pressure 10 points, or raise your pulse 10 points. And try to do that for a few moments. And now, I'd like all of you to feel ecstatic. So, conjure up a mood of pure ecstasy and joy. Now, I'd like you all to think about what you did last night, the hour before you went to sleep. And the last thing I'd like you all to do is to raise your right hand. Glasser will then go through this and he'll say, now what was the easiest to do? Generally speaking, the easiest thing to do was to raise your right hand. Usually the next easiest thing was to try to remember, even if you couldn't remember, you could think back to what was I doing last night before I went to sleep. Conjuring up an emotion of ecstasy, generally speaking, if people are able to do that, the way that you do it is you try to recall a time when you were doing something incredibly pleasurable. So you conjure up a very happy memory. That's getting to your feeling through your thinking. And if you try to raise your pulse or your blood pressure, there are generally two ways that people will do that. One is they'll think of something which raises a lot of anxiety. If you want to raise your anxiety by thinking about some tense moment, a fight that you just had with your partner, you are thinking your way to changing your biology. The other thing is I've had students in classrooms get up and start jogging in place. If you're jogging in place to raise your pulse, you are changing your biology through your doing aspect of behavior. And that, I think, is just a really nice model of Glasser's car, and why in therapy we focus on doing and thinking rather than feeling and physiology, assuming that where the front of the car is going, the back of the car will follow.